Today's passage comes from the prophet Hosea, chapter 11, verses 1 to 11. This is one of the most touching and moving passages about God in the Old Testament. The I is God, Yahweh, who is speaking through the prophet Hosea. He talks as a loving, utterly committed parent of his child, Israel, and it's full of anguish and pleading, love and frustration. Unusually, the metaphorical language of parenthood, often used of God, is more of a mother than a father. Verses 3 and 4 describe the nurture and care of a mother, feeding and protecting her child, cuddling it, teaching it to walk, soothing and comforting it. Could there be a more tender description of God's care for us? But God is baffled that despite all this loving care and nurture, Israel has rejected God and followed other gods instead. Hosea, like the other prophets, tried to call them back, but they would not listen. Like rebellious teenagers, they went their own way. This period was leading up to the defeat of Israel, the northern kingdom, by Assyria, and the taking into exile of many of its citizens. This political disaster was attributed to the nation's unfaithfulness to the covenant with Yahweh. On the one hand, they deserved to be punished, to experience the mess that they were in politically, to be taught a lesson. But on the other hand, Hosea expresses God's grief about this. It's not an anger which delights in revenge. On the absolute contrary, it's deeply conflicted emotion. Verse 8 is like a wail of lament. How can I give you up? How can I hand you over? How can I abandon you to the fate which you can hardly imagine, even though you're walking into it by your own volition? Many a parent has experienced this anguish and conflict when a child goes off the rails. It's unthinkable, though, that God should finally abandon his covenant people. So Hosea affirms that the disaster will not be final. The people would eventually return from exile. They shall come trembling like birds, like doves from Assyria, and I will return them to their homes, says the Lord. This is a wonderful insight into what it might be like to watch human affairs from God's point of view, if I may put it like that without being blasphemous. If we ever think that God is far away in heaven and indifferent to events on earth, remember this passage. Feel that anguish when one nation or group tears another apart. We can only imagine it in human terms, like a grieving, rejected parent, and God's actual experience is beyond our ken. But even then, how must God feel about the wars of the world? All of them. Not least in the Middle East, the cradle of all the monotheistic religions, and the origin of the covenants of the Old and New Testaments. There is some comfort in this passage, though, that however bad things may get in the world, God remains faithful and will not give up on us. For I am God and no mortal, he says, and I will not come in wrath.